The important thing is that we get more representative as we go along. So on one hand, we saw the resilience of the Nigerian people standing in lines, willing to brave the heat, whatever it took to make sure that their voices were heard and that voted counts. So that's something we should all be very proud of. On the other hand, they had to be resilient, and that was unfortunate. We obviously saw and noted as an observer mission delayed poll openings, not always having materials available, some confusion. And so while the people were resilient, the election administration process was not as smooth and not as transparent and not as effective as it can be and as it should be.
Thanks so much. What improvements can be made? I'm hesitant to use the United States as an example, but I guess we can. In the United States, elections there are disaggregated at the state level, and so each individual state in the United States handles their own election operations. Should that be repeated? Is that a bridge too far? What are the improvements that can be made for INEC to be more efficient?
Well, so every country, every state, every community is different, right, in terms of the details, but it's the broad underlying principles that count most. And I think what we see here as a challenge is that there wasn't a dry run, there wasn't a test run done, there wasn't a stress test run done, so that we would have seen in advance some of the problems that were reported on election day. So I think it's insufficient planning, quite frankly. But most importantly, it's transparency. People in this country are hungry for democracy. The fact that you're covering these stories means that the media is hungry for democracy and elections and voting. And I think INEC would be well served to be 100% transparent all the time. So on election day, if there are problems that pop up, simply hold a press conference or put out a statement saying, look, here's the problem, this is why, and this is how long it will take to fix it. I think when there's silence, that creates a vacuum, and then people get fearful. They start to get suspicious. And so I think one of the most important things is for INEC to be transparent and to constantly be sharing whatever results they have, sharing whatever problems they see with journalists and with the public.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Green. Now, one thing that you pointed out that's crucial is communication. And we have definitely seen that, at least from what analysts have said, that INEC has not necessarily done the best job in terms of the pace of communication, in terms of how quickly matters are being addressed. We just saw something happen at the Coalition Center, even though people were told that that's not the place to, make your issues known. That's strictly a Coalition Center. And we also see that when it comes to uploading the results on the IREV, that's not being done real time. So how much grace should we actually give and how much understanding should we actually give INEC regarding this communication aspect that leaves so much room for speculation?
Well, and I think that last point that you just made is the key one. So anybody who administers elections, INEC or those who administer it in the United States, you don't have to have all of the answers in order to communicate and be transparent with the public. Instead, simply be honest about what you're facing. So if you've got particular problems, if you've got shortages, simply say, we have shortages. People are understanding. People are patient. It's when nothing is said that people start to fear the worst. They get suspicious, and in some cases, there isn't a reason to be suspicious. I think what we would say is that so many of the misunderstandings could be avoided by simply saying things publicly. I'd like to go back to something that you said, and it's very, very important. I would never say that the U.S. and our democracy has all the answers. What I often say is, look, as a democracy that's still learning, perhaps we've made all the mistakes. You don't have to make the mistakes that we have made. You can learn from our own experience of mistakes. Close friend of Nigeria, U.S.-Nigeria relations are very solid. We share democratic values, so we can learn from each other. That's why we're here as election observers.
Ambassador Green, I just want to follow up on something you said. Well, you said democracy is a journey. Are you giving INEC a bit of a pass? Because to be frank here, how hard really is it to administer these elections? We're talking about a logistics exercise where you simply have to provide set materials. You've had 4 years to prepare because these elections happen every 4 years. You talked about insufficient planning, for example. Is it really that hard, Ambassador Green? Is it really that difficult? Should we be here?
Well, what I can say is that the NDI-IRI Joint Observer Mission, we actually did 2 pre-election assessments as well last year. And what we noted is that doing a test run, doing a stress run would be a great way to avoid the problems. And I think that's one of the things that should have been done. We look at this as a missed opportunity. There was a good opportunity here to advance democracy in ways that the Nigerian citizens could be proud of. Clearly, the Nigerian people are strong believers in democracy. We saw it at the polls. But unfortunately, the administration fell short. And so what we would say is, let's learn from the lessons. It is important. This was a missed opportunity. And let's make sure that as this story continues to be written of democracy, we learn these lessons and we're honest with each other on the shortcomings that we've all seen.
All right, Ambassador Green, in your joint statement released with Her Excellency President Joyce Banda, you noted that the election fell well short of Nigerian citizens' reasonable expectations. Now, on election day, the word voter disenfranchisement was being thrown around a lot. What are your observations? Would you go as far as to call what you witnessed on election day, what you observed on election day, as disenfranchisement?
Well, what I can say, and it's obviously in our statement, that we observed a number of situations where voters felt as though they were disenfranchised because either of the fallout from the cash crisis or confusion over voter lists or polls opening up late or the VIVA system not working as well as it should have. All of those together clearly hurt the involvement of voters. So to that extent, I would say that it hurt the participation of Nigerians in the election process.
Ambassador Green, if you're planning a wedding, you outsource that to a wedding planner. If you're planning a dinner, you outsource it to a caterer. I run a business show on the Arise television on the broadcast, and we talk a lot about privatization and government getting out of the way of the private enterprise. Can if you think about some of the challenges that we've seen with individuals, voters having to provide tables and markers and lights and generators and equipment, can this exercise, do you think it can be outsourced to be more efficient?
Well, that's really a decision for Nigerians to make. What I can say is that so many of the problems that you've just pointed to and that we've all read about were avoidable and they were foreseeable. And I think that's what the frustration is. You noted it. We've heard it from other people. Look, we've had time. Now, the Election Reform Act of 2022 was a step forward and brought about some reforms, but clearly this falls short of the kinds of democracy or the administration of democracy that Nigerians deserve.
Well, Ambassador, thank you. This election has been hailed for a number of reasons, including the fact that it was not postponed. But I'm curious, based on what you saw play out in the past days, not just on Saturday, would it have been okay for INEC to have postponed these elections, seeing that they were actually not ready from what we're seeing play out?
Well, again, that's a decision for Nigerians. I would say on my own part, personally, I'm glad it wasn't postponed. I think people were anxious to exercise their vote and express their voice. And that expression is important, especially with gubernatorial elections coming up quickly. So imperfect as this may be, we'll all be watching carefully. At the end of the day, Nigerians will need to decide whether these elections were credible in the sense that they captured the will of the people. We'll all be watching the results as they come in. The sooner they come in, the more transparently they come in, the better, obviously. But what we can say, what we do know, is that Nigerians are hungry for democracy, they're hungry to vote, they're willing to stand in line, and they deserve an administration and an oversight that I think is worthy of that.
Right. Now, the world is watching, but more importantly, Africa is watching. On a slightly more positive note, I'd love to know, what do you feel that other African democracies can learn from the exercise that we've just witnessed here in Nigeria? There must be some positive takeaways.
Oh, very much. So, again, the hunger to vote, that people want to vote. I think also the lessons around planning and planning for contingencies. We had cash shortages and fuel shortages, obviously. You really have to plan well in advance. And again, I keep coming back to it, but I think doing stress tests and test runs and making sure that you go through practice runs before you ever go live in public with voting. I think Nigeria can certainly provide lessons for other African democracies.
And Ambassador Green, you've mentioned the gubernatorial elections is coming up in about 12 days. Can if we were to have this conversation with you in 13 days' time after the gubernatorial election, do you think there's enough time for improvements to be made?
Oh, there are always opportunities for improvements, and clearly some of the statements that we've heard from INEC and others suggest a recognition of changes that need to be made, organization and papers and opening of polls. So it's never too late. So we're all looking forward to learning lessons and moving forward.
Before the February 25th election, INEC had the opportunity of carrying out the mock accreditation. And most of the issues that were raised and recommendations that were made, it doesn't look as though, first of all, the issues that were raised were truly addressed and that the recommendations were followed through. Would you suggest that more mock accreditation exercises be done maybe way before the election's supposed to happen, and more frequency?
Yes, certainly, and that even goes back to some of the recommendations that were made in the pre-election assessment. Look, Nigeria is a big country, it's a complex country, it has a wide range in its geography and such. So yes, I think advanced testing, as you put it, mock accreditation, I think that's a wise idea.
All right. In your release, you made reference, of course, to the much celebrated reforms of the Electoral Act 2022. Now that you've experienced the nuances of a Nigerian election, a beautiful document, I believe we all agree. Is it achievable in any reasonable, foreseeable future?
Oh, most definitely. It requires the dedication, obviously, of officials and the people. So I'll give you one real strong sign of optimism. Who administered on the local level so many of the elections were young people. We were impressed with some of the young people and their resourcefulness. You made some reference to in places where there were insufficient supplies or tables, how hard they worked to make sure that there was an opportunity to vote. I think that's a real sign of optimism. I think another reason for optimism, when I looked at the long lines that we saw in some places when the polls opened late or when the materials were a little bit late in coming, nobody left. And people stood there in an orderly fashion and talked about the importance of voting and made it clear. So I think there are lots of reasons for optimism, and the will of the people of Nigeria is strong and vibrant. So I do believe that they will continue to bring about these reforms, other lessons that we're all learning. So I think democracy in Nigeria is definitely moving in the right direction.
Ambassador Green, speaking of moving in certain directions, we're in the digital age. We've got central banks around the world that are looking at, digitized, central bank digitized, currencies, CBDCs. And we've got Bitcoin, you've got cryptocurrencies. Electronic voting. Now, of course, the Nigerian Constitution doesn't allow for that. We had a special report looking at voting with the possibility of voting with mobile phones. We talked to INEC about it, and individuals in the private sector, they all said we're not quite ready for that yet. What's the future of voting looking like to you, Ambassador Green? And can technology play a role? If we're having this conversation with you 30, 40 years from now, what does voting look like? Can technology ease the process based on your observation?
Sure.